Desert Radio Podcasts.
We also have our neighbors in South Africa having their elections soon, and we're shifting our focus now into regional politics with the ruling African National Congress bringing out the big guns in former Presidents Thabo Mbeki and Kgalema Motlanthe to campaign. The election season is reaching its peak, really. In South Africa, the Democratic Alliance had a campaign video ban on state television, while the economic freedom fighters are doing as much as they can to pick up ground while there's still time. To unpack the happenings on the ground, we are joined by journalist Tshidi Madia from EyeWitness News rather. We were supposed to be speaking to political commentator and former eNCA news editor, that's Kanthan Pillay, but he will probably join us on the line a little bit later. Tshidi, to you, a very good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Indeed. Thank you so much for making some time for us this morning. Just set the scene and the tone for us. What's happening on the ground? 2 weeks now from elections. What's happening?
Yeah, we're about to go into that crucial period where electioneering is about to be heightened. Political parties are hard on the ground preparing for their final rallies where they're hoping, of course, to convince the electorate to go out and vote. I think what we've been seeing is a lot of contestation around key battle provinces, so Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, and I think the Western Cape are those three. With regards to KZN and Gauteng, these are the most populous provinces and all of the most voting stations and the highest number of electorates. While KwaZulu-Natal has the most voting poll stations, Gauteng has the most number of registered voters, followed by KZN. Between the two of them, I think they represent well over 5 million of the votes that are up for grabs. You also happen to have Western Cape, that's governed by the DA, where you're seeing a lot of young or new other political parties attempting to make inroads and trying to bring the DA under. But I think that, it's a heightened election period, but there's also really cool tempers, if I may. I think there's a lot of tolerance. While there might be skirmishes here and there about posters or not being allowed to campaign here or there, by and large, it has been, it's quite an interesting period. I think it's heightening. It has been in a bit of a lull, but yeah, definitely, certainly, we are seeing parties on the ground.
Indeed. And Kanthan joins us on the line this morning as well. Kanthan, to you, a very good morning. Tshidi was just giving us
good morning to you too, CJ. Yeah.
Indeed. Tshidi was just giving us a brief really on what the situation is like on the ground. You've been following quite closely also. Just give us your take on what the environment is like, about 2 weeks ago to May 29th.
I think that, there's a lot of interesting stuff that's kind of coming to the fore right now. So there's been a flurry of legislation that the Ramaphosa administration has been trying to get through Parliament very, very quickly. And the most controversial one is the National Health Insurance Bill, which was signed into law this week. And I think that there's a lot of opposition that has now been rallying around this particular bill because it's seen as a kind of final straw in terms of what's happening with the general breakdown of everything that the ANC touches in the country. And the other interesting bit, of course, is the ongoing support that's been rallying around former President Jacob Zuma, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. So it looks like this might be the first election where the ANC drops below 50% nationally for the first time.
Indeed. And let's break all those things down. Tshidi, Kanthan just speaking to us about, that law that was signed in yesterday, aiming really to provide universal health coverage, in the country. The Ramaphosa-led government, of course, being very happy about it, screaming positivity about it, but it's been bashed really by opposition parties. We saw Musa Maimane with an extensive video yesterday online. Does this seem to be just pure politicking, or has this been in the pipeline for a while?
Kanthan.
All right.
The question was put to me, so let me try to answer, Kanthan. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
So I want to quickly address something that Kanthan raised. So as you bring Kanthan on, I hope you realize that Kanthan is somebody who had put his hand up to try and lead in the last election. So I think he's somebody who has an interesting view on where we are. But the Purple Party, from correct, Kanthan, was something that the electorate didn't necessarily warm up to. But in terms of the NHI, I think it's rightfully contested. But I think it's a multi-pronged situation if you look at it. I don't think I look at it as wholly, which is a perspective that Kanthan has put forward, the rejection of the ANC by the electorate. I think it's slightly different from that. I think that people are entitled to universal care. Let's recognize that, number one. Secondly, let's also recognize that it's not a new issue. The NHI had been a contested terrain, contested issue for a long time now. It's a long time coming. But at the same time, you've got to be able to recognize that the government must be able to explain the timing. Pieces of legislation, it is common effect actually that you see them trying to squeeze in lots of legislation just towards the end of an administration. It's not unique to this particular window. But I do think that you must question how in the ceremony where the president is signing this particular bill into act, you are seeing, into law rather, what you're seeing, this act into law, you are seeing a flurry of ANC leaders at the union buildings for this moment. Suddenly the Treasurer General, the SSCP is there, and that actually does speak to electioneering. The presidential spokesperson might want to make an argument that it's a coincidence, but I don't believe so. I think that the ANC, in part of some of the promises it's been making to the citizens, is that it will bring about universal health. So it is a party facing a decline. I think we're all in agreement that the ANC faces the most difficult elections yet, and one where it could see itself going under the 50% mark. And so they're trying almost anything possible to try and counter that. So you can't look at this moment outside of the elections. You've got to see it as a part of it. And I think that the opposition are correct to be hopping mad and to define it as electioneering. But I think it's not just one-sided. I think we can't pretend it is only being brought on for these elections. This is something that's been in the pipelines for some time. It's also something that has a lot of gaps and will be contested, and I think rightfully so, before the courts going forward.
Kanthan, you agree with Tshidi there?
Well, there's a couple of things that I want to point out. The one is that I'm not fundamentally opposed to the concept of NHI. In fact, in my book, I have a significantly long chapter on, firstly, why we need an NHI, because it's actually something that's essential from the perspective of providing a safety net, particularly for the entrepreneurial class who need to be able to start businesses without having to be held hostage by medical aid schemes based on a pay packet. It's something very fundamental. The problem with the NHI, as promulgated by the ANC, is that it's an entire disaster because it tries to put constraints on the part of the medical practitioners themselves, and it tries to curtail access on the part of the public to those medical practitioners, which is an absolute disaster. So I've put forth a couple of structures in terms of how to actually make NHI work, which very fundamentally means that you force the existing medical aid schemes to create minimal viable products that can actually then allow for these to be extended across to all of the masses. And I've done the calculations, and it becomes very profitable for those companies as well. So the issue here really is not that there's a disapproval in principle. It's that the ANC has a track record of incompetence and of corruption and of rent-seeking on everything that they do. And the question is, how do we actually get out of the flurry of litigation that's now going to tie up the NHI for the next 10 years? But I think that the interesting thing that's going to happen is, with the forcing of, if not coalition governments, then at least a ANC with a plurality government that's going to be dependent on the vote of either the EFF/MK on one side or the DA on the other side in order to pass legislation. And that's going to be the game changer going forward in this next election. And I think it's a good thing for South Africa all around.
8:33 is the time on the clock. We are just looking at what our neighbors are doing down south. That's in South Africa. The Of course, election campaign is reaching election season rather, it's reaching its peak, as May 29th has been the date that's been set for general South Africans to go to the polls and start voting for possibly a new government, maybe the same government. We'll all see how that pans out. We in conversation with Tshidi Madia and Kanthan Pillay this morning. Tshidi, I remember you having a conversation with Ace Magashule various times when you were still SG of the party, but now of course outside of the party as president of his new party. Last time he spoke to you, said he'll be bouncing like a tennis ball. It doesn't seem to be bouncing anymore. It's been quite quiet, hasn't he?
He has. I think Ace Magashule, funny enough, if you look back at that period, I felt even then, and I think I've said it a few times, I think it made some strategic errors in terms of political speaking. This is somebody who was dubbed lifetime chair in the Free State, where he was a premier since before the advent of democracy. The ANC was premier, and the understanding from people in that particular province was he's this all-powerful character who knows politics really well, and I couldn't get a sense of that from the way he managed his issues at the ANC. It was internal war, never mind the fact that here's a man who's facing very serious allegations of graft. He had to try and fight for his life. You had him running the Secretary General's office, but you also had a Cyril Ramaphosa presidency. And by and large, a lot of Ramaphosa's allies were not at Lutuli House, which is where the center of the party is. And one would have imagined that if Ace was this astute player, politically speaking, that he was called, he would have managed that space far better than what he actually did. So I didn't expect much from Ace going forward. When I watch ACT, because he started a political party and its dilemmas, it's already starting to implode seemingly. I'm not surprised by those things. When you hear of talk that he's trying to work with the former president Jacob Zuma, and he's not finding expression there either, again, I'm not surprised. He will contest. In fact, he's holding a rally this very weekend that I'm hoping to attend so I can make an assessment. But what I can tell you is that it's a small party, it's inconsequential, it's not able to contest as well as it wants to as far as the elections are concerned. It didn't manage to field all its candidates on time with the IEC system. It went to the courts, as far as the Constitutional Court, asking for a postponement of the elections, and he hasn't managed to get it. So he'll go into the elections not necessarily with the capacity he wanted to contest in, and over and above that, he'll also struggle with just the numbers. And also, he's a regionalist by nature. He campaigns around the Free State, around Parys, where he's from. He's not been able to try and reach out to other provinces or to create an even bigger base. He failed to even use his position in the ANC, a national position at that, to try and grow his base beyond the Free State.
Kanthan, I'm asking Tshidi that question in particular because you, as she also just referenced now, brought up Jacob Zuma, who's now...
Look, I agree. Look, I agree 100% with her in terms of, the fundamental comparison we need to make between Jacob Zuma and Ace is that Jacob Zuma has been able to get access to funding. As we know, starting a political party and running a campaign is an expensive process. I threw my hat in the ring in 2019 because I wanted to shake up the political environment, and that was money that came out of my own pocket, and I've got no regrets around that. But the point is that if you were someone like Ace Magashule, if you don't have access to funding, and I think that most of us are very clear that nearly all of the political parties in South Africa right now, the major ones, are getting funding from outside the country. And there are various factions who are throwing money in this direction. My view has been very clear for a while that Ramaphosa has the backing of the Americans, and Zuma has the backing of the Russians, and the rest of the ANC factions have the backings of the Chinese. And but again, this is speculation on my part, but it's very clear that all of those factions have money at their disposal, but Ace doesn't. And it is ultimately going to be the great determiner in terms of whether people are able to make any inroads at a political level. But Zuma's got this really slick operation going. There's clearly money behind his marketing campaign, behind his social media team is excellent. And so there's clearly good money behind it.
Do we see that reflecting into tangible results, though? Do we actually see Jacob Zuma having a powerful impact into how things sway post May 29th?
Look, I think that we definitely going to see a significant impact in terms of KwaZulu-Natal, which is where he has been concentrating most of his efforts. I don't think he has his sights really set on a national platform, but I do think that he has his sense of consolidating power in KwaZulu-Natal. And we could very much end up with a coalition government in KwaZulu-Natal with Jacob Zuma as premier of the province. I think that that's an outcome that he'd be very likely happy to be settling for.
I want us to park that thought there because we'll get back to it shortly. Tshidi, I just want to get your assessment on what we saw about a week or two ago when the South African Broadcasting Corporation, the SABC, decided not to air the video by the DA. It was a campaign video, an election video in essence, and it showed the burning of the South African flag. There were many, sort of comments around it. What was your assessment of that issue?
I actually wanted to also comment on the eNCA party, but you said we'll come back to it, so I'll leave it for now.
Okay.
In terms of the DA's flag burning exercise, I think the DA understood very well that it's taking a risk that will cause controversy, because since then they released a second advert that's slightly more positive on a positive window. So my thing about that particular ad, for instance, it's not unlawful. It's not something that goes against the Constitution. We might have feelings about it. They're trying to drive through a particular message, and strongly so. And it's done the job. I asked people on social media, what are your thoughts? Has the DA actually done what it ought to do? Does the message hit home? Or the fact that you're talking about it make this ad a success? And I think the fact that we were all talking about that ad made it a success. My biggest problem was when the SABC released a statement banning the ad, saying that they must amend it before it runs it, saying it goes against particular values, or it's concerned about encouraging the burning of national symbols. I understand that mindset, but I don't think that the public broadcaster's job was to also tell us that the president has expressed displeasure. We don't care about the president's displeasure. The SABC's mandate should not care about the president's displeasure. I think that was an error on their part. I found ourselves as citizens siding suddenly with the DA, defending. A party has the right to be stupid, and it should be allowed to do so. It's well within its rights to do so. And I think that the SABC was wrong. It took the wrong decision. And I think those who, with the outcry followed, that outcry was well placed. The SABC was wrong on many fronts. I know that it said that, Rugori Kasa, again, as I said, I know that there is a new ad, but I think the Democratic Alliance achieved what it wanted to. It became topical. The DA's campaign had hit a terrible lull. So I do think that particular saga also was good for its campaign to boost its numbers and for it to be seen in a particular way. There are a number of swing votes in these elections. I think you're looking about well over 1.5 million to 2 million of people who remain undecided. And I think moments like that, where you are pitted against an SABC that people think is controlled by the ANC government, it does work in someone's favor to a degree, to a party's favor. And I think that the DA would have reaped those benefits. But the DA, in the same breath, is its own undoing, where its leader goes out in public and makes unsavory comments, some that are seen as fear-mongering and with pepperings of racism. So there's two sides, I suppose, to how they've decided to approach the elections. But I don't think that the ad, particularly because of the SABC, harmed them.
8:42 is the time on the clock. We wind down our conversation this morning with Kanthan Pillay. He's a political commentator, former eNCA news editor. He also ran for elections in 2019 under the Capitalist Party of South Africa. He's joining us this morning with Tshidi Madia from EyeWitness News, and we're really just unpacking what's happening in South Africa in terms of the build-up to elections. Tshidi, I'll allow you to come in and make your contributions on the MK party quickly, and perhaps on that, just adding to this perception that there is, well, at the very least on this side of the border, that if votes are going to be split properly around South Africa, it's going to the ANC, the DA, the MK party, and the EFF.
So Kanthan raises a very interesting point about KwaZulu-Natal. I do think I agree with him in that it's not a party that's looking for national presence. They know that when you gauge from a President Jacob Zuma's popularity, it's mostly really around KZN. And I think the reason why they want to make themselves look like they have a national posture is because, first of all, elections are about numbers. If you are going to go to a negotiation table, you want to put yourself in the best position to barter for what you want. So if KZN premiership is what he wants, you need to make sure that you are in that position. The argument has always been that Zuma would want to go back to the ANC and say, I'm here willing to help you with the numbers that you're missing to remain in government. The question becomes, is the ANC so desperate to remain in power that it would accept a hand from a former President Jacob Zuma? And I don't think so. I think it's quite complicated because I think whatever demand Zuma makes is one that the ANC cannot simply accede to. And I don't think wants to be seen to be doing so. It will be seen to be rewarding what he did. So I don't think that the ANC would agree to that. I think I was in KZN, not that I think, I went to KZN a few weeks ago just to try and get, in fact last week, to try and get a feel of how big MK is. And the sense that I got is that there are pockets where the MK is influential. So if you go to Maritzburg, where Mervyn Dex is from, it definitely is quite present. Parts of Umlazi, it's up against an IFP that remains quite relevant there. But it's not as big, I felt, as what I thought it would be. Similarly, the tension on the ground is not what I expected it to be. I found people were quite cordial. Political parties of different kinds were able to manage and navigate the province quite well with each other. There was a lot of tolerance. So it told me a slightly different picture. I mean, there's somebody in the MK party who likes to say to me, Tshidi, we're a social media party. So it remains to be seen. The MK party has also been very clever with where it's campaigning and where it's contesting by elections. It has made clear decisions based on councillors which reflected. It didn't just contest anywhere or any of the ANC strongholds. So it doesn't truly tell you anything. The ANC strongholds, I suspect, will remain loyal to the ANC. But in the ANC, it's had an issue of dwindling support. While in Gauteng, for instance, the issue has been its supporters remain loyal to the ANC but don't turn out because they're angry. They don't go out to vote. As opposed to the KZN where they leave. KZN is still very difficult terrain. I couldn't call it. I left there saying I actually don't know what will happen in terms of the votes in December and now in May. But I do believe where Kanthan is correct, former President Jacob Zuma's party will do something substantial to the numbers for the ANC come elections in KZN. I think that I do see it coming onto the board and being a player. I think the EFF is paying the price even for the existence of the MK party. A lot of people thought it would be just the ANC that's hammered. I think the EFF is taking quite a beating too.
That's an amazing segue to get into the role of the EFF in this, Kanthan. Politics is perception, isn't it? And from what we've seen, just on the media, look, Julius Malema he's been saying a lot, he's been doing a lot. The party's been quite busy, at least over the past year. But of course, everything matters when it comes to groundwork. Everything matters when it comes to tangible results, as I've said earlier. What are his chances in terms of shaking things up?
Look, I tend to agree with what Tshidi was saying just now, which is that the EFF for quite a while now has been seen as a better alternative to the ANC, particularly for young voters, because there has been this sense, and I think that it's a very accurate sense, that the Ramaphosa administration did not really have the interests of young voters at heart, and that they had lost, that the ANC had lost its way in terms of what it originally used to stand for. And I don't believe that perception extends to Jacob Zuma. And so to a large extent, if you weigh up the fact that Julius is seen as a hothead, but he's a preferable alternative to Ramaphosa, but at the same time, you have Jacob Zuma, who is seen as old school ANC, who is committed to delivering things at a grassroots level. And look, let's be very clear. If you look in terms of northern KwaZulu-Natal, and I'm talking in the vicinity of, former industrial towns like Newcastle and the vicinity, Jacob Zuma has delivered real returns on the ground for the electorate out there. So he's built hospitals, he's built schools. All of these things happened during his tenure. And voters out there have not forgotten that. And they've said, we used to have these things happening under Jacob Zuma, and they're not happening anymore under Ramaphosa. So, and the flip side of that is that the EFF has made promises to deliver those things, but they've not done so. So I think that to a large extent, you are going to see that votes that would potentially have gone to the EFF are now going to go to MK, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. And is it going to significantly dent the EFF? I don't think to a large extent, but it is going to hamper any projections they might have had around growth.
As we wind down our conversation, Tshidi, I'll start with you. From what I'm getting from you and Kanthan is that there's a huge possibility the ANC will probably get below 50% and we'll probably see a coalition government. But majority of the votes will still go to them in any case. Is that what you're sensing come post May 29th?
Yeah, I think the ANC will still get the lion's share of the votes. Whether or not it's enough to scrap through remains to be seen. Part of me thinks that the ANC can manage a 50+1 or be over 50+1 at national. I think the question marks for me remain Gauteng and KZN and the Western Cape as far as the DA is concerned. I think the way John Steenhuisen has been behaving, I've been watching it for some time, that those numbers don't look good. And you've been watching parties like Patriotic Alliance and Rise Mzansi find expression with, in Rise Mzansi's case, I think young professionals who have never been catered for but voted for the DA or whatever the case may be. In the Western Cape, with Patriotic Alliance, I think the coloured votes are finding expression. One would have imagined that even the Gaza conflict impacts the DA, but I think one would say it should batter the Patriotic Alliance. But we're seeing them fill the stadium for the first time in the Western Cape. So that's the one picture. In terms of Gauteng, as I said to you, the ANC's biggest battle here is not necessarily support, but it's about supporters coming out. I don't know if Panyaza Lesufi and his team have done enough. Next week, we're going to see the ANC's NEC doing an invasion of this particular province of Gauteng, and we'll see whether or not that moves the ticket in there towards some direction. But I do suspect that in KZN and in Gauteng, they'll end up needing smaller parties to partner with. I don't think that the bleeding will be as much as like 38%. I think that's quite severe, and I think the ANC is at least working to have around 40-45% in order to be able to only need a small partnership. And in that case, though the IP is part of the multi-party charter, it is one that many in the ANC mention as an ideal partner to work with.
Kanthan Pillay, for May 29th, what results are you envisioning?
I think that certainly in terms of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, I'm predicting that the ANC will drop below 50%. I think that overall, at a national level, the ANC is still going to be the biggest party, but are they likely to make 50% plus one seat? I think that the jury is out on that one. I think that certainly nationally, I expect them to poll in the mid 40s, which will necessitate a coalition of sorts, or at least a power sharing agreement of sorts at a national level. I do agree that the situation in the Western Cape is not as clear-cut for the Democratic Alliance. I think that they have certainly alienated a lot of voters in the Western Cape, particularly in terms of their stance on supporting Israel. I think that was something that they had just not read the room correctly on that. There are 2 million Muslims in South Africa, predominantly in the Western Cape, and they feel very strongly around the Israel-Palestine conflict, and it was just wrong for Steenhuisen and the party to actually take sides in that conflict. They should have just stepped back and said, let the UN do its things and we focusing on South Africa. So I think that's going to cost them votes. I do think that Gates and McKenzie has been making inroads, particularly in terms of the Cape Coloured vote, which I think is a fairly significant block in the basis that they've historically voted for the DA as well. So, but do I think that the DA will drop below 50% of the Western Cape? I don't think so. I think that they are going to take some losses, but they'll still end up effectively running the show out there. But the really interesting thing for me is going to be what happens in Gauteng and what happens in KwaZulu-Natal. And remember that Gauteng, in of itself, is the single biggest economy in South Africa. You take the GDP of Gauteng and you add the GDP of the rest of South Africa together, and Gauteng actually is bigger than the rest of the country put together. So it's the most decisive power play. And I think that things are going to be quite complicated until parties are able to reach agreements. But let's see what happens. A lot can happen in 2 weeks.
Well, I told you that this year is very busy when it comes to elections all over the world, in Africa to be more specific. We have our own elections come November 27th, but just down south, we'll see in May 29th, South Africans going to the polls as well. Kanthan Pillay and Tshidi Madia just broke it down for us in terms of what has been happening and what we can possibly expect. Tshidi, it's been a pleasure being in company with you. Kanthan, equally so. Thank you both so much for your time. Well, I guess speak again come May 29th and maybe after that.
Very happy to.
All right, thank you guys.
Indeed. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Desert Radio Podcasts.